Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Mercedes Okosi, representing the Coalition for the Advancement of Nigerian Mental Health, CAM. And I'm here today with Nnamdi Chiekwu. I'll introduce him and talk a little bit about his book, and then we'll get into some discussion. So Nnamdi Chiekwu is an entrepreneur and founder of the Nandex Group Africa, a private holding company with business interests in energy, logistics, mining, services, and agricultural sectors in West Africa. Mr. Chiekwu was a co-founder and partner at Nandex at Benjamin Gerald LLC, a multi-service broker-dealer and one of the first firms on Wall Street to provide private placement fundraising services exclusively to emerging African private equity fund managers. Prior to founding the Nandex Group, Mr. Chiekwu worked in corporate strategy and consulting for Fortune 100 companies and financial restructuring firms in the US. He attended Reinhardt University, where he received his bachelor degree in general commerce and graduated with honors. He also earned an MBA at Emory University, Guizeta Business School. So welcome, glad to have you here. I want to put up your website as well so people can know where to find your book, and we'll get to talk a little bit about that. So, your book is out now, Africa on the Precipice, the blueprint to steer the continent and diaspora to redemption, available on all of your major bookstores, Spotify and Apple for audiobooks as well. So welcome. If you could tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and your concept of Afro-Hegemonism.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. In terms of the inspiration to write the book, so I've been doing business, as you alluded to in my bio, in Africa over the last 10 years. And it was that experience of working on private sector projects, public sector projects, especially in the country of Guinea, in the Republic of Guinea, in West Africa, where I really ingrained myself into the community, mind, body, and soul. And that phrasing, mind, body, and soul, we're going to come back to it. But I really integrated myself into the community, not just from a business standpoint, but to understand Francophone Africa in a way that I never had experienced it before, because I'm from Nigeria, Anglophone Africa, etc. And it was that process to seeing Guinea evolve over the 10 years that I've been visiting the country, and the story of Guinea from a socioeconomic and political standpoint came to a kind of a crescendo in 2021 when there was a coup in the country. And it was after the coup in 2021 that I really took a step back to ask myself, what is it that just happened in Guinea? Because for me, Guinea is a microcosm of a lot of African countries and a lot of African history over the last 100+ years. And so that was what inspired the book, because I learned so much, I perceived so much, and also I saw many dangers in front of us. Because if Guinea is a microcosm of Africa in a lot of ways, then we are literally on the precipice for a dreadful century. And so I wanted to communicate that in literary form with as many people as I can and get the message out, get the word out, but more importantly, put together a plan to say, how can we reverse this potential danger that I see? And that's where this concept of Afro-Hegemonism comes into play.
So I'll have some questions for you, particularly related to some of the work that we do as mental health providers, not just in terms of like our specific clinical work, but knowing about, like you said, all of the different political history, trauma history of different African countries, what that means in terms of empowering people to join in and enact the plan that you talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess first question, I guess define a little bit more for our audience African hegemony, and then we'll get into what that how that impacts individuals and how individuals can be empowered to enact the plan.
Right. So the whole concept of Afro-hegemony is this idea. It's an ideology that says that it is only by rediscovering and implementing African, authentic African. I want to be very specific about that because I think a lot of our Africanity, a lot of our culture, etc., has been watered down over the centuries because of our interactions with different foreign people. But it is only by rediscovering, re-implementing authentic African socioeconomic and political models that we Africans can not only self-actualize as individuals, but also as nations and as a continent and as a group or race of people. But then also, not only can we realize real, true self-actualization and economic development, enlightenment, but I believe that we would also arrive to a point where we export that to the rest of the world. I think for the longest time, even till today, Africa has been a plate of importation of ideas, religions, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, what the world doesn't realize is that we have so much more to export to the world in our authentic knowledge bases, in our authentic culture, that I think would actually be a better platform for the world to operate on. So this idea of Afro-hegemony is really to say that we need to go back to our roots, but then we also have to extend that to other cultures because I think we have a lot to teach other cultures, especially the Western culture, in terms of how to move humanity forward. And to take it a step further, I contend in the book and just within the ideology itself, that it's only through Afro-hegemonism that the world and humanity will survive this century. I think as a planet, we find ourselves on a precipice of sorts with climate change, with various geopolitical conflagrations around the world. And I think it is time for us Africans to step up. It is our responsibility and our obligation to really steer the world in a different place. And I think we are uniquely positioned to do that because among all the various cultures that I've experienced and I've seen, the African culture is the most accommodating. It is one that I believe can be trusted in a place of custodianship to lead the world into a new era. But we can only do that by going back to that which we were before we began to lose our way a little bit. So that's the whole concept of Afro-hegemonism.
Yeah. Yeah, so in our recent forum, the theme was focused on some of the historical and systemic conditions that have impacted people's well-being in terms of specifically Nigerians today, but Africans more broadly as well. I'm wondering if you can say more about how some of the current limitations we have in terms of infrastructure or systemic things maybe barriers to overcome to enact this plan and how people may need to be empowered to start to make those changes.
Right. So that's a very good question. In order for us to implement or realize the benefits or the goodness, I think, and I use that term interestingly, but the goodness of or what the full potential of what Afro-hegemonism is, there are a couple of concepts that we have to, I think, understand better, grasp, and then also some other concepts that we have to reanalyze, review, reevaluate in the African context. Okay, so the first concept that I want to bring to the table is, you know, in terms of mental health and psychology, we often talk about it at the individual level, right? But I also think that societies, groups of people also have a collective mental health. And I think this is, you know, some may say pseudoscience, and you know better than I do, but you know there might be some evidence and research out there to give credence to this. But there is such a thing as you know, a collective memory, collective trauma, collective intellect of a people, collective you know, kind of an institutionalization of shared feelings and emotions, etc. And it's important to kind of delve into this concept because as Africans today, we not only have to kind of deal with our own individual mental health, our own individual psychological, pathologies and so on, but there's also the wider societal aspects that we have to deal with too. And I would contend that unless we deal with health, mental, spiritual health at the societal level, it makes it even more difficult to do it at the individual level. Okay.
Yeah.
And so to be specific about this, you have historical trauma in the African psyche, such as slavery, that we have never dealt with. We have never, in any kind of formal or informal way, collectively, as a group of people, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, dealt with what is one of the most devastating traumas that a group of, a people or race have ever gone through. And it's important to note, as I shared in the book, that slavery is an enterprise. It's something that many civilizations engaged in. But the issue with African and specifically transatlantic slavery is the industrialization of slavery that happened with us. And then not only was that industrialization, but the net impact, the net effects of that slavery in terms of what it did to local communities, and not just about the bodies that were spirited away, but what impact did it have in the lasting communities. And we haven't dealt with it. And the signs that we haven't dealt with it is that you see very few, we have never, for instance, we don't have an annual memorial for slavery to say it should never happen again. How can we stop it from happening? So we have no memorials. We have very few statues. We have very few things recognizing it. And so the trauma of that alone continues to permeate so much of what we do mentally and spiritually, and even physically in many ways, right? So in order to kind of realize Afro-Hegemonism, we have to go and deal with the societal mental health at the macro level, okay? Now, the other aspect of dealing with African well-being, not just mental health, but African well-being today, is that we have gotten to a point that we've allowed the conversation of well-being to be centered almost completely on economic well-being, right? This idea that you have to chop first, you have to eat first, and you have to collect first, before you can do anything else, before you can pay attention, and so on. And a lot of that mentality is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a concept that you take care of the physiological needs first, safety needs, community needs, and all the way till you get to the point of self-actualization and transcendence. So there's kind of this pyramid of human needs that you have to take care of. And to be fair, in Maslow's initial work, he never actually referenced a pyramid in terms of the hierarchy of importance. But there is a perceived hierarchy in terms of these needs. Now, what's interesting I find, not just in the African context, but in the human context, is that the human needs are not necessarily hierarchical. I think it's more circular, right? I feel like, or not I feel like, but I believe there are certain times where self-actualization, transcendence, and these kinds of concepts, community, are more important than the individual needs. Because if you don't have them as a foundation, you're not going to be able to actually do the simple things. So somebody who is mentally depressed or doesn't have a sense of community, they're going to find it very difficult on a daily basis to get up and go to work and be productive, etc.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is in Africa today, you find this tension to the extent anyway that we recognize that we have a problem in terms of this societal mental health that I talk about, or this well-being. You have this tension between the drive for development and economic betterment. And then the question is, well, how do we best get there? And there's a lot of talk about developing citizens, which is important, education, and so on and so forth. But unless we correct, evaluate, face the mental and spiritual aspects of our society, of our cultures, we are never going to see the kind of development, economic or otherwise, that we seek, right? So I think it's an important kind of connection to make there that is not highlighted enough in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of um concepts that are kind of at this point now seen as like standard and uh necessary, or like key points in Western psychology, are often talked about in terms of like stages or hierarchies, when in real application, especially in a bunch of different various cultural contexts, it is like you said, often circular or bidirectional or multi-directional, where yes, someone's basic need for life is like food, water, shelter, but it interacts with the other needs in the sense that, like, if they're connected with community, there can be systems in place, people around them who help facilitate them getting those other needs met as well, in terms of how all of those things contribute to their general well-being.
Right.
You said something too about the like unresolved nature of a lot of the trauma that the African diaspora has been through, and the like mental health of societies. And I do think there is a way where both someone's individual mental health status and the norms of their culture, the circumstances of their particular context, the values, the institutions, the things around them in their society that are unwritten rules, things that are acceptable or not accepted, are informing how they view themselves too, both in like smaller microsystems like a family or a
Mhm.
community or a village, and then
Right.
also on the world scale in terms of what it means to be an African person.
Hmm.
And it seems like with your vision and your plan,
Hmm.
um, putting Africa in the forefront on the world stage would do a lot in terms of like not just the empowerment of African societies, but shift the meaning of for the individual in terms of what it means to be an African person, and a different, more of a sense of pride in that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's another kind of idea that I want to introduce that some might find somewhat controversial, but I would contend that the world has not seen a real African in the last maybe 500 years.
Hmm.
If you don't mind me, for excuse my forwardedness, you're not an African. I am not an African. Or I wasn't an African until I embarked in this journey of writing this book and doing the work to rediscover and to become an African. Being
Hmm.
Black doesn't necessarily make me an African, right? Um, and the reason why I say this is that there is no African who has lived over the last 500 years, who is devoid of the scourges of capitalism, consumerism, white supremacy, and religious bigotry, etc. And so we have been inundated with foreign concepts and systems and cultures and mores, etc., to the point that African culture has now become tokenized in many ways. Just because, so I'll give you a specific example. You know, I'm an Igbo person, right? I speak Igbo. But just because I speak Igbo or wear Igbo traditional gear doesn't make me Igbo. If I don't do as Igbos did and live like an Igbo person, think as an Igbo person, apply systems as an Igbo person, then I am a caricature of what it means to be an Igbo person. And I would contend that the world has never really met an African over the last 500 years because of the steady degradation of the essence of who we are, of our socioeconomic models, our political models, etc.
Hmm.
And so that I think that's a very profound and even scary thought. Um, and when I realized that I wasn't an African, that I had to go and do the work, at least begin to do the work, right? Because it's a journey to reassert, rediscover, and earn the right to call myself an African. Because the day that the world sees the real African, I think the world will change, and I think I think it will inspire a lot of fear and respect of what it is to be African. And so part of this whole concept of Afro-hegemonism is to galvanize Africans to go and rediscover themselves and understand that we are not what we think we are. A lot of the cultural behaviors, a lot of our perceptions on gender, a lot of our perceptions on spirituality, on concepts such as God are 100% indoctrinated, that we have weaved it into ourselves and our culture so much that we actually even begin to think that this is kind of who we are. And they're two separate things, right? And the world needs the true African today, because part of what I did in this book is I looked at, okay, where did we start becoming African specifically? Where did we begin to lose our way? And it's really in the 15th century. You know, before the 15th century, you know, African societies, yes, interacted with other foreign societies, but there wasn't this kind of cataclysmic change or cataclysmic breakdown in the mental, social, political, economic well-being of Africa until about that 15th century, where our interaction increased with the foreign world. And with that interaction and adoption of new systems, etc., and the introduction of, you know, things like capitalism and so on, and the militaristic behavior of other cultures, specifically the Western world, then that change really took place, right? So part of the push or the call for Afro-hegemonism is to get the African to realize they're not really even African in the first place, and to go and begin to do that work, to go and begin. And I'll give you another specific example. In my culture, in our culture as Igbo people, the Oje, the kola nut, is such a sacred aspect of our culture, of our community, of socialization, that you can't invite somebody into your house without sharing kola nut and saying the prayers that come along with that kola nut. If you do not have kola nut as part of your kind of daily ritual, you are not Igbo. You are not. If you don't do what Igbo people do, you are not Igbo, right? Authentically. And so when we begin to rediscover these fantastic, beautiful systems, that's when we become powerful again. And the tragedy of it is this, is that specifically of colonialism, right, is that what happened with colonialism is, you know, if I come today and I happen to overpower you and beat you up, does that mean that I'm smarter than you? Does that mean that the experience and knowledge that you have is useless? Because that's what colonialism did to us and taught us. Just because a group of people were able to militaristically dominate and subjugate another group of people, all of a sudden, what those group of people who were subjugated had, all the knowledge and all the wisdom and all the beautiful things, were somehow useless just because of a point in time and just because of military aggression. And so we must go back, and not only to save ourselves, but to save other cultures, and as I see it, to save this planet. Because I believe that the answers for the next era is an African socioeconomic and political models.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking of all the different examples of like things that are so like deeply embedded and intertwined with how like contemporary African people of today think of their specific cultures that are like not what the original authentic kind of practices were, but are like now like part of the identity, so much so that like, for example, if you say you're not religious, there'll be people who think that you're less Igbo because you're not Catholic, you know, or like different, whereas like you may be doing all of the more like authentic traditional practices, but because things like religion or like you said, capitalism have been so intertwined with what it means now for people to think of what it means to be African, that it's hard to untangle. So I'm wondering too, like, where in this process, in the plan and the aspiration that you have, what do you think it will be like in terms of people's mindset and need to shift the mindset to not to like embrace and want to achieve the authenticity of these African identities and the original ideas and practices, and not see giving up some of the contemporary things as like a loss or a departure, or like giving up or losing out on something. Because I would imagine that there are gonna be like Auntie so and so is not gonna stop going to church, and whoever
Yes.
that's building their business or whatever is not gonna divorce from capitalism. At least not, it won't be a quick and swift change or mindset change. So what will that be like?
Yeah.
The resistance or the barriers?
So there are some hard truths to be shared. I wish I had very easy answers for you. But so one of the hard truths to be shared on this question is that it's too late for the majority of us.
Mm.
I often say this, that even a 10-year-old in Nigeria today is compromised.
Mm.
Because when, the key, so let me start here to begin to unravel this question. The tactical, the mechanical key or bridge to get from the derivative of the watered down version of Africans we are today to the authentic Africans that we should be, or we should aspire to be, comes down to education and indoctrination. Education and indoctrination, for me, are the two pillars, are the two drivers, are the two levers of change and evolution in human societies. Okay. So we would need to, how do we get there? We would need to change the educational system and the systems of indoctrination in order to make that happen. Now, the problem is that indoctrination I like to talk about indoctrination like a pathogen. It can be a positive pathogen. We all have bacteria and all kinds of stuff in our body, and it can be a negative one too. Negative indoctrination creates all the various social ills that we see today, and positive indoctrination gets humanity to operate at the highest levels that it can. The problem with indoctrination is once you're touched by it, because, we are indoctrinated even in the womb.
Mm.
Indoctrination doesn't begin, when you start going to school or start interacting within the society. It starts even as early as in the womb, that, children are aware. A child is aware to a degree in the body when the mother is happy and so on. There's actually this is not pseudoscience, it's some actual, substantial science to corroborate.
Yeah.
So the problem is, once you're infected by it, unless you go and treat the condition of that indoctrination specifically, purposefully, you will continue to show the symptoms of that indoctrination. And the problem is, on a wide macro basis, we have been infected with the indoctrination of capitalism, inferiority, white supremacy, foreign supremacy, and so on and so forth. So the question of how do you bridge that gap? For the majority of us, it's too late. Because it's almost like Plato's allegory of the cave. Because even if you showed some people, this is, what it means to be an African, here's the benefits of it, how you get there, a lot of them, they're too far gone to be able to do that, right? But for those who want it, there is actually a process, and it's through re-indoctrination and through education, rightful education, factual education, that will allow you to kind of cross that bridge, right? And in terms of the loss, if you stand here, then you can't be here. If you embrace Igbo traditional spirituality or Menani, then you can't, be going to church. And I don't believe you can do both. I don't believe in that sort of dichotomy. You can be a Christian and still do Igbo traditions. No, you must choose. And so in any type of growth, there is also a loss. And anybody who's not prepared to lose or to detach themselves from previous forms of indoctrination and ideology, etc., you can't evolve. You can't become an Afro-Hegemonist. You can't reach to a place of authenticity. There is no, as I see it anyway, compromise in it, right? You can't take an infected organ and bring it to expect that the body is going to function well with that infected organ.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's kind of like that you would have to have the foundation of seeing the return to the authentic version of things as that you're gaining something and be able to even have that perspective in the first place to move toward it so that the things
you
you're saying
you
no to don't feel like a loss.
you make a fantastic point. Gaining something. The driving force in the narrative of the history, of human history, really, in many ways comes down to power, power of self-actualization, and then power over the other. What Afro-Hegemonism tries to do for the African is to say, okay, if it's power that you want, if power is the incentive, which is usually the incentive behind what humans do in many ways, if you take a cynical view of the world, if power is what you want, then this is your route to power. If you really want to be powerful, which is in my rawest definition of power, to have control over yourself and others, then Afro-Hegemonism is the way. That is the way. And so for those, when you talk about the incentive, the benefit they get out of it, if we want to come out of the social, economic, mental morass that we are in Africa, this downward decline that we have been in for the last 500, 600 years, then Afro-Hegemonism is the answer. It is the way. It is the only way. And it's the only way, not only for us, but for humanity as far as I see it. Because let's not forget that we are the progenitors of humanity. That whatever wisdom that our distant cousins have, it came from somewhere. And we, as the progenitors of humanity, must rise to a place of responsibility and obligation to bring our cousins and our children back. You know, we had the originals here. And we must see the power in that. If we want to elevate ourselves, then this is the way. And I say that, quite frankly, at the risk of sounding arrogant, not as an opinion, but as a message to our people that this is this is the way. Yeah. Yeah, Afro-Hegemonism is the way. And it's the foundation of everything else to come.
Yeah. Last question, because you've, been very thorough in explaining a lot of your concepts and vision. I guess like in the future, this plan is enacted over time. We are getting to the point of that you're aspiring to. And maybe a lot of people are on board. Maybe, like you said, there will be some people who are left behind because they make their choices. How are you imagining the like day-to-day operations and mindset and well-being of an African person in this future would look like?
That's a fantastic question. I think there's an interesting aspect of African culture, which is that we're heavily invested in having a good time. We like to dance, we like to sing, we like to do all these, things that are very freeing and social and enjoyment driven. And what's interesting is for a lot of our history, modern history, the world has told us that that's backward or irresponsible or foolish. And I would suggest that, what we have defined as a purpose as individuals and as communities, what the Western world specifically, and to a lesser degree, the Eastern and the Middle Eastern world have defined as a purpose, which is economic gain, economic development. Well, we've seen the end game of that. Humanity, I cannot proclaim to know what the purpose of humanity is, but it's certainly not to grow GDP, which seems to be
Yes.
the only thing the governments talk about. To a degree, it's to learn about this planet at a minimum that you're in, interact with it, ask questions, evaluate it, deconstruct it, break it down. And then for goodness sake, enjoy whatever time that you have.
Mhm.
I And this is a very important point because, and the more global point that I'm making here, when you talk about what does the day-to-day look like with their African, it looks like enjoying your family. It looks like having a good time. It looks like doing the simple things we were doing 500-600 years ago before these ideas of development came to the table. Because now what is called development, it's turned on its head. What foreigners have defined as intelligence, as advanced, has now turned on its head. It's turned on its head really by looking at the condition of the planet today. Is this what the epoch of humanity is? All that so-called intelligence? And I want to make this point associated with that. And it goes back to that Afro-Hegemonism concept, which is that we had a lot of knowledge and wisdom that actually worked for us and could work for others. One of the observations that the Western world had when they started interacting with Africans is that we were animists. We worship, you know, we worship trees and rivers and so on and so on. We commune with them. And this has been looked at as if it's backward, right? So in our culture, for instance, in certain Igbo cultures, you can't go and do certain things without negotiating or asking the goddess of the river or spirit before you do it, because we had this sense that all things, all living things had an agency. You know, what's interesting is that's now been proven to be true in scientific terms. A river, for instance, is alive in the sense that it has flora and fauna. So it is a living thing. You just can't go and do anything you want to it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is we had this natural wisdom. You know, in today's world, when you want to go and develop a hydropower dam, for instance, you have to go and do something called an ESIA, which is environmental, social, and impact analysis. An environmental impact social analysis is effectively communing with the river goddess or the spirit of the river, say,
Yeah.
can we put a dam there? We knew this 500 years ago. The Western world is just discovering it today. You see the danger of this? You see the danger of the current world order, right? I'm not sure what we broke up a little bit there, but you see the danger of this. So
Yeah.
this is the knowledge and the wisdom that we had 500 years ago, and the Western world now, the so-called developed world now, is now doing environmental social impact assessments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because for the last 500 years, we have allowed the Western world specifically to define intelligence and knowledge in terms of IQ and logic.
Mm.
Unfortunately, these cultures have not valued insight and perspective. And living and going through life just based on valuing IQ and logic is, for me, very two-dimensional. It's like, for me, the kind of perspective that an ant would have versus what a bird would have. A bird has a very 360 multi-dimensional view. It has insight, it has perspective. It's so much more global than what an ant has. And so we
Yeah.
have developed this world order that is based on that has that kind of value system. And therefore, we have lost so much insight and perspective. And Afro-Hegemonism says, leave that world alone. It's leading us to annihilation. Let us go back to the authenticity of our perspective and an insight. That is what will create a greater human society. And obviously, there's more details around that, but that's really the general concept.
Yeah. So, yeah, it sounds like being able to be empowered in the authenticity, the perspective, the insight, but also like make within yourself and your own community and the African societies that will live in this future, make your own meaning, find your own sense of like ease and enjoyment, and like take pride in the different cultural practices that come naturally or had come naturally to us.
Absolutely. And you know, listen, I'm a finance guy. I studied strategy. I am not oblivious to the practicalities of life. I am not
Mhm.
oblivious to macro and microeconomics and so on. I'm not, these are things that are important, the day-to-day and organization and governments and systems and so on and so forth. But I think the meta point that I'm making is that really, for the majority of human history, uh, and I talk a lot about Western society, but I don't that it's not just them. There are so many civilizations. We have to look at the Asian civilizations, the Arab civilizations, even within Africa amongst ourselves. But a lot of human history has been based on subjugation of the other. Right? You meet a tribe that you've never seen before, rather than communicate and see how you can develop with that tribe, you wage war on them to take land. It's been
Yeah.
very materialistic, subjugation-oriented history, if you look at humanity. And the era of of Afro-Hegemonism, I believe, is one that is not steeped in subjugation, but in shared enlightenment. That
Hmm.
is the spirit and the vision that I would have for an Afro-Hegemonist world.
Yeah.
But let us not make any mistake about it. In order to create that world, we must first do away with this world. So there is an impending friction that we must not be afraid of, because those who are custodians of this current world order will not let it go. And I say it's time to let it go, because you're not only going to lead yourselves and others, but you're going to lead this planet into annihilation if you don't let it go. So it's no longer a choice. The world no longer has a choice but to pursue Afro-Hegemonism, as far as I see it. And we Africans must have the confidence to institute that.
Thank you so much for your time. I'll put back up on the screen your book so everyone can buy, read, listen in more detail to some of the concepts you laid out today. It was great to have you, and I look forward to being able to finish and uh, spread some of the knowledge that I've gained from you to other people in my community as well.
Absolutely. Thank you
Um,
so much for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.